Welcome to 15 Minutes with a Moss Media production. Today we are talking with Steve Barry, who is author of the new book coming out called Bishop's Pawn. And this book I'm so excited about because I interviewed Steve about a month ago about the book and we talked about it. Steve is an American author. He's a professor, former attorney living in Florida. He was a trial lawyer for 30 years and held an elective office for 14 of those years. And he's founding member of the International Thriller Writers, a group of more than 4,200 thriller writers from around the world. And he also served 3 years as its co-president. Steve is a best-selling author. So excited about this book because this book focuses on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. It is historical fiction, and it really looks at the why Martin Luther King was assassinated and talks about some of the things that we don't know, including the FBI involvement. So welcome, Steve.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So let's jump right in. Your book, again, it focuses on the assassination of Martin Luther King, which we're approaching the 50th anniversary of that on April 4th of this year, and looks at the why of his assassination. And there have been so many conspiracy theories over the years, whether James Earl Ray was actually the shooter, whether the FBI was involved, were there other groups, underground groups that were part of this whole assassination. How does all this fit into your book?
Well, a lot of it does, and a lot of it doesn't. I spent 18 months reading about the assassination, and there's so much out there, and all of it is kind of like, really, a lot of it's just way out there. The problem is there's never been an apolitical, objective investigation of the death of Martin Luther King. There have been 3 investigations, all of which were tainted in some way. So we've never had a really an objective look at it. And there's some wild theories out there, crazy things. I decided not to go there. I don't go with in that direction. I go in a different direction. I focus more on why he was killed. Which to this day we have no idea of why. And I go in a different way. Yes, the FBI does figure into my theory because let's face it, I'm writing a novel. My primary duty is to entertain. So I have to have my action, history, secrets, conspiracies. I have to have all those things in there. But I tried to ground it in as much reality as I possibly can and put forth a theory that's a little bit different. Now, I also don't go with the other shooter theory. I assume that Ray pulled the trigger.
Okay, because that's something that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, it's been more than 20 years. I was in graduate school at the time, but I remember when Coretta Scott King was still alive, and they were talking about whether or not James Earl Ray actually was the shooter, but all evidence seems to point to him actually being the shooter. And there, you know, so many theories abound because Jesse Jackson was there, and it's like the only person shot was Martin Luther King. How do you explain that in your book, him being the only person shot and the target?
Well, I got to be careful here because I don't want to give away the surprise of the novel, which would actually give that away if I was to explain that. But I will say this. King was told not to go out and be in public. You know, don't go out and make yourself a target. There was a lot of tensions in Memphis at this point in time. Emotions were running really high up there. His life had been threatened, but that was not unusual for King. Though this whole Memphis situation was a bit unusual. The tensions had come unusually high. And yet King goes out and he stands on the balcony for about 12 minutes, you know, out there in the wide open after being told not to do that, which is just very interesting. Now, there was no one else that could have gotten shot because everyone else was down below.
Right.
He was up on the balcony, so he was the only one in Ray's sights. There was no way to he couldn't the angle of where from Ray was. The people down in the parking lot were not necessarily a target, but King was a prime target there. So it always begs the question: what was he doing out there for so long after being told not to do it?
Right. And let's be clear, because a lot of people don't understand why he was in Memphis in the first place. It had to do with the garbage workers strike,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
also too, he had launched this Poor People's Campaign, which we now see a resurgence of, people trying to relaunch the campaign in the 50th anniversary of it. But he was there for this garbage workers strike. I mean, there was a reason that he was there. And the night before, he almost foreshadowed his own end with his famous mountaintop speech.
Did. And that's really where the idea of the novel came from. When you listen to the mountaintop speech, and just not the last few minutes, that's what we always hear. We hear those last few words. You got to look at the whole speech, and it's not very long. And the incredible thing about the speech is that King spoke that night with no notes and no preparation. He was sick. He wasn't actually even going to talk, and they got him to come in. He came. He spoke completely extemporaneous, made up every word as he's saying them. And that entire speech, when you listen to it, sounds just like a man who knows he's about to die. And it fascinated me. And so that's where the novel idea came from. And I've had this idea for this novel for about 10 years now. And I held it until this year because of the 50th anniversary.
Well, you bring up a good point with that speech, and a lot of people don't realize that one of the people who wrote a lot of King's speeches was A. Philip Randolph. And particularly with the I Have a Dream speech, one of my favorite speeches of Martin Luther King's is the Selma to Montgomery speech after that march. And a lot of what people don't pay attention to, particularly with the mountaintop speech, is the rest of it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it. And we always hear that last part when he talks about not getting to the mountaintop, not going to get there with you and that type of thing. But that's at the very, very end. Yeah. Now, in the novel, I was given permission to use a large chunk of the speech. So it is in the novel, and you will actually be able to read his exact words, and you'll see what I mean when you take a look at that it sounds just like a man who knows he's about to die.
Well, let's talk about the assassination itself and the investigation into the assassination. In recent years, the actual FBI file has been open, redacted, of course. I've looked at it, heavily redacted.
Yes.
But we noticed that, J. Edgar Hoover was very much this was very much something that he really had it out for King.
Yes, he personally despised him. And it came after a silly incident, too. King and Hoover had gotten into a little war of words in 1963 over, King took exception to the FBI's investigation tactics and their hiring practices, right, which Hoover took, at that time the FBI was all white. Hoover was an avowed racist. There's no question about that. We know that from reading his writings now. And he just did not hire African Americans in the FBI. King took exception to that. Hoover took exception to the exception. They tried to set up a meeting, and King didn't return Hoover's call. And it wasn't that he was snubbing him. It was just that King was very bad at returning phone calls. It was just a thing with him. And he just simply forgot, just didn't do it. Hoover took that as a personal affront. And from that point forward, he set out to destroy Martin Luther King. And he spent the next 5 years going after King. And he did some horrible things. I mean, they taped him, they surveilled him, they did everything. They even sent a tape, a very embarrassing tape to King's home so that Coretta could listen to it. Right. He caused a lot of problems in that family. King, of course, held firm. Coretta, to her credit, held firm. She wasn't going to let J. Edgar Hoover destroy her marriage. They stuck it out, but what Hoover did to Martin Luther King today, if you did that, you'd go to prison. We would put him in prison, but it was a different time. Hoover could get away with what he got away with. Hoover was corrupt. There's no question about it. He was absolutely corrupt. He should have been removed from office decades earlier. He should have been put in prison towards the end of his time in office. I don't see how anyone could argue any different. He violated every law and rule you could think of.
Well, let's talk about the FBI now, because now it's in the news. Now we really see this divide between our federal government, current administration, and the FBI. And, you know, the FBI worked very, very hard after J. Edgar Hoover to kind of restore its reputation, because Hoover did so much damage. And they've been very deliberate in following protocol and tactics. And now here we have people saying, again, you can't trust the FBI. Where do you think we are with that? And can we trust the FBI?
The FBI, you have to remember something. The FBI is not a police force. That is not its function. It was not created to be a police force. It is not a law enforcement agency. No, it's not. It's an investigatory agency. That was its job. Its job was to investigate, then refer its investigation to the proper authorities for prosecution. So that's what the FBI's function is. What we have today is it's getting caught up in politics. Mm-hmm. All it started back, with the Hillary investigations. Those were very political investigations. Let's don't get it. You can couch it any way you want to, but politics completely overshadowed all of that. Now we're into the Russia investigations. Again, there's politics all over all of that. So both sides have tried to use the FBI to its advantage. The FBI is trying to stay neutral. It's hard to stay neutral in this situation. It's really tough, particularly when you're split almost 50-50, way people are split. And people are people, let's face it. The people doing the investigations are human beings. They're not machines. They have emotions, they have feelings, they have opinions, they have all of that. So what happens is the FBI is getting caught up in political wars. That's where it really where we are. And anytime you get in a political war, the rules are very, very different. And the FBI is beginning to see that. I suspect eventually they will extricate themselves from that and get back from it and get away from it and go back to doing what they always did, and that is to investigate.
Well, here's my final question to you. Again, you in your book talk about things that the FBI got wrong with regard to the King investigation. And like you just said, it's an investigatory body. They investigate things and then refer to the proper authorities. A very good friend of mine, Keith Boucham, he was very instrumental in helping to get the Emmett Till law passed, where they started to investigate civil rights era deaths and murders. And, they've gone back. They did get the, I can't remember his first name, his last name was Cherry, one of the bombers of the 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963. They've gone back and have gotten some of these other killers of people of that era.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the FBI now is using their authority to really go after it? Because here we are 50 years out from the 60s, but there's also the 70s, 80s, 90s, like I forget his first name, but Byrd in Texas. Even though people were convicted of that crime, it speaks to a larger kind of problem. Do you think that the FBI really can be more useful in that?
I think they're righting the wrongs of the Hoover era. You have to understand, Hoover did not really prosecute civil rights crimes.
Right.
He wasn't interested in prosecuting civil rights crimes. He wasn't interested in investigating civil rights crimes. They weren't important to him because, number one, he needed the help of local law enforcement. Remember, I told you the FBI is not a law enforcement agency. It's an investigatory agency. So he very much needed the assistance of local law enforcement in the South. So Hoover stayed out of that. He stayed out of confrontation with the local law enforcement. This is exactly what Martin Luther King called him out on in 1963 that started all the fight between the two of them. So Hoover's the problem back then. And what's happening today is they're going back and trying to right some of those wrongs. It's tough because so much time has passed. Most of the participants are dead. The evidence is gone. But occasionally you can hit a home run and you can actually catch the perpetrator and bring them to justice. But what you're seeing is righting a wrong from Hoover. As I said before, he was a corrupt individual who should have died in prison. That's where he should have died.
Again, your book is Bishop's Pawn. It is about the assassination of Martin Luther King. It is a fictional account based on research that you spent a long time doing research. Tell us where people can reach you and the date the book will be released.
Book comes out on March 20th. It'll be in stores everywhere in all formats, hardcover, ebook, download, Audible, whatever you'd like. It's all there. You can find out more about the Bishop's Pawn and me at steveberry.org, which is my website.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you.